Today on our cooking segment, we'll be making tomato salsa. Our ingredients that we have to start out with will be 6 pounds of tomatoes and half a cup of cider vinegar. You can also use white vinegar, but I think with the tomato salsa it works better with the cider vinegar. It has a little bit more of a complex sort of taste profile to it. And also the Mrs. Wages salsa mix. This comes in a mild, a medium, and a hot flavor. I like to use the medium. So to weigh out tomatoes, because when you're growing them in the garden, they come in all kinds of various sizes. I have a kitchen scale here, so you can use a colander and sit it onto your scale, and then it has a tare button, which will then put the scale unit back to 0, so it will not take into effect the colander weight, and then put your tomatoes in there. So here I actually have 12 pounds of tomatoes, because that's just how many I actually had ready to go during this segment in the garden. I think with the combination of the good weather that we had and the rain, I just sort of had a nice little wave of tomatoes ready to go. So if you happen to have maybe only 4 pounds of tomatoes ready to go, you can also pick up a can of petite diced tomatoes to sort of make up that difference. And then also if you don't have garden tomatoes, or you didn't make it out to the farmer's market to pick some up, you can just use just these. But garden tomatoes make a much better salsa. They have a great flavor to them. So once you get your tomatoes weighed out and you get your 6 pounds, or in my case, I now have 12 pounds of tomatoes, you're going to want to wash them first to get any sort of pesticides that you may have used in the garden off of them. And then you'll need to scald the skin off of the tomatoes. This is an important step so that you can peel the skins off. To do that, you're going to need to have on your stove a kettle full of boiling water. And the idea behind this is not to actually cook the tomato, because you don't want it mushy, because it makes this part very difficult. So once you get the water boiling in the kettle, you're going to want to carefully place the tomatoes into this boiling water for about 3 minutes. Depending on the ripeness of the tomato, and sometimes even the type of tomato that you have, this process of sort of splitting the skin or scalding the skin will happen almost instantaneously. So once it goes in there, you'll see the skin actually just split, and you'll want to go ahead and get that tomato out of there. In your sink, you're going to want to have, waiting for this, for the tomatoes, an ice water bath, so that you can immediately stop the process. Again, because like I said, you do not want to actually cook the tomato in this process. So once you have scalded your tomato skins in the hot water bath and transfer it over to the ice water, you'll do all of your tomatoes at once. And then once that's done, you're going to go ahead and drain your tomatoes, and then bring them over to your cutting board, and you're going to go ahead and core and skin the tomatoes. This is kind of a messy process. And go ahead and just roughly chop the tomatoes. I like to kind of do mine at about a medium dice. I don't really want to pulverize them, because the next step after we mix the ingredients, we are going to transfer these diced tomatoes over into a kettle here, and we actually cook them. So if you get too small of a dice here, it really breaks the tomato down too much, and then your salsa is going to be kind of runny, and I like a little bit thicker bodied salsa. So Mrs. Wages has some directions here, again, on the back that you can follow, but I always use this mix as a base, and then I sort of branch out from there. So in my garden, I also grow some banana peppers to use, and I add this into my salsa. You do not have to do that, but I like to sort of add a bunch of other stuff. I think it makes it taste a little bit better. So in this batch, I'm going to go ahead and add some banana peppers. So I have diced up 8 banana peppers. So I'm going to add half into this batch and half into that batch. And then I also have a large red onion that I have diced up, that I'm going to go ahead and add half into this, half into that. And you can use a yellow onion, a sweet onion, a white onion, it doesn't really matter. And here is my favorite herb of all time. I use it just about every day in everything. I love it, is cilantro. I used a whole bunch, just about a whole handful of it, and I diced it, and so I'm going to go ahead and add that. Again, half and half to my pan here. And I also have juiced 4 limes. Again, you do not have to add this, but I love lime juice in my salsa. It adds a little zip to it. And then we'll go ahead and add our vinegar. The mix calls for 1/2 cup per batch. My numbers have about wore off here, but I've used this cup to death. I know where I'm at. Alright, so 1/2 cup. I do not need to use my canned tomatoes because, like I said, I had 12 pounds of tomatoes. So I am right on the mark. And again, this is Mrs. Wage's Create Salsa Mix Medium. Medium has enough zip in it. So it's plenty hot. Some other things that you could add in here if you wanted to. If you didn't like cilantro, you could exchange that for parsley instead. You could use jalapenos instead of the banana peppers. I'm not crazy about jalapenos. They're a little too hot for me, but some people do. I have some people that I make salsa for that absolutely love jalapenos in theirs, and I usually just make a whole entire batch just for them. So I throw it in and process them up some jars and ship them down to them, and they can just have hot salsa all they want. So we have to mix this up really good. What I really like about this recipe is that you have a couple different options here. Once this is mixed up, you can actually eat this salsa right now, which is why I have some chips standing by. Or once we cook this, you can also have the option of putting it in these freezer safe containers once it cools and freeze this for up to a year. Or we can also go ahead and move on to the canning step, which is what we will do, and have it canned and store it on the shelves, which is what I usually do with all of my stuff. So that's very nice to have 3 different options to do with this recipe. We'll get this all mixed around. Unfortunately, I do not have a big enough bowl to handle 12 pounds of tomatoes. When I do my salsa, I have several different types of tomatoes in here. I have beefsteak, I have celebrity tomatoes, I have homestead tomatoes, and I even tried this year a purple tomato called a Cherokee purple tomato, which I am really thrilled with how it turned out. Not crazy about the way it looks. It's not a real pretty tomato if you're going to look at it, but actually it really slices up very nice. It's really meaty, and I think it's going to hold up really nice in the salsa once you cook it. So some people like to use just strict Roma tomatoes in their salsa and sauces and things like that. It's a really good tomato for things like that. It has a good taste. But for me, I like to use a bunch of different tomatoes. I think that it just makes salsa just a little more dynamic. I like to try a bunch of different tomatoes in my garden. To me, I have tried to grow Roma tomatoes several years in a row, and they just do not like me, and I do not like them. So Roma tomatoes and I have agreed to disagree. So we do not do Roma tomatoes in our garden anymore. There's just something about them. So we're going to get this all mixed up. I'm going to try to carefully. I'm going to try to stick my tongue out. I have a habit of doing that. when I was little and I would cut with scissors, I would always like move my mouth back and forth like that too. So I'm going to try to refrain from that. And again, this is going to all be transferred over here to this pot, so we're just going to mix up good enough because it will be mixed up once we get it over here to the pot. And then I like fresh salsa, so I'm just going to grab one of these bowls and throw some in here for me for now, and my camera guy Keith and Hank sitting over here to enjoy while we wait for the cooked stuff. Ta-da! On our chips. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the pot over here, and we'll be back in just a minute and get all this stuff transferred over to the stove, and we'll be back in just a sec.
First and Peoples Bank has 6 convenient locations to serve you. From South Shore to the main office, First and Peoples Bank has been serving this area with complete banking services since 1932. Visit the home office near you. First and Peoples Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
We are the home office. Come visit any of our 6 locations.
Okay, so we're back, and we have transferred our mixed up salsa into our kettle, and we turned it on to medium-high heat, and we have brought it to a boil. So once the salsa has come to a boil, you're going to want to stir it just occasionally. You're not going to be there stirring it a lot because, again, you will break down the tomatoes and make it just a little bit too runny. So you want to turn down your heat to like medium-low, and go ahead and turn on your hot water canner to high heat to go ahead and get that fired up and ready to go to process your jars. You're going to also go ahead and turn on your small kettle of water back here to simmer to go ahead and get the hot water ready for your lids to be ready to go to do. So we'll go ahead and throw those back in there. Also, we'll go ahead and put this on medium, which is our extra water, to make sure that we have enough water covering the jars for processing, so if there's an inch of water over there. Earlier during the process, I also went ahead and steamed and sterilized my jars for canning, which we'll go ahead and start to get out and stack here to be ready to go for the next phase here. So we'll let this simmer for about 10 minutes, and then we'll be back to go ahead and start loading the jars. Okay, so our salsa has finished simmering for 10 minutes, and we are ready to go ahead and put it into our sterilized jars. So you have to be very careful because it is extremely hot. So in this, you will definitely need one of these wide mouth funnels to get this in here because it gets a little bit messy. And you also want to have your wet washcloth ready to wipe off the rims of the jars to make sure that the lids do seal. So let's go ahead and dip up some of the salsa. Again, being very careful because it is hot. I recommend having a red dishcloth down here so that you're able to get it off when it goes through the laundry, because it will stain. I like to use green cloths for pickles and red cloths for salsa. You want to leave a 1/2 inch headspace. Headspace is the distance from the liquid in the jars to the top of the jars. There is a canning kit that you can pick up at Walmart, Kroger's, Tractor Supply Co. that comes with a spatula that looks like this that has the headspace things sort of calibrated there on the side. Has 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch markings on there, but you can also eyeball it. A 1/2 inch is right here at this this ring right here. So you can just sort of look down in when you're filling the jars and see when you get to that mark. And this stuff splashes, so please be careful when you're doing this. So as I was saying before, you can do two different options here. You can process the cans in a hot water canner, or you can put the salsa in a freezer container and let it cool and freeze it at this point, which is a nice option. I prefer the canning method. I think it stores a little better. And plus my freezer is full of tater tots and frozen pizzas and all that fun stuff because football season is coming up and I have to have quick food on hand to feed my football players. Because it is busy, busy, busy time of year. School starts. We are just going to make this can because I've got a couple little bit extra here. So I'm going to spoon out because I've got a little bit too much in some of these jars. And sometimes that happens. Again, this is messy, but that's okay. Get all little bits and goodies out of here. So you're going to take your clean washcloth and wipe off the rims of the jars. This is important to make sure that it seals when you place the lids on. The jars are hot. And then in that canning kit, there is a magnet. Stick with the magnet on it so you can get your lids out of the pan here easily. Go ahead and place those on the jars. And you'll take your bands and go ahead and put those on the jars about finger tight. And you don't want to crank those on there because you'll never get them back off. You can hear my dogs in the background, so they're arguing over a rawhide. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and remove the lid from our hot water canner. And our water is at full boil. And go ahead and take our tongs and carefully set these hot jars. And bring, watch the steam. That's my Boston Terrier in the background, making all sorts of noise. And then for quart jars, we are going to process for 15 minutes. And if you decided to do pints instead, that will be 10 minutes. Do some rearranging here. And leaving enough space. The water gets around there. Get your mitts. Go ahead and carefully set the jars down into the hot water. Make sure there's about an inch of water covering the jars, and we're a little low, so that's why I have some water here on the side. And when the water returns to a boil, that is when you want to start your time. So we're pretty close here, so we'll go ahead and put the lid back on. And when it returns to boil, which we're about there, We're going to wait 15 minutes and we'll be back. So our buzzard has gone off for 15 minutes processing time, so we're going to go ahead and turn off our hot water bath canner and remove our jars. It's hot. My crew is making fun of me. They did on the last segment because I like to do this in my bare feet. They're going to kill me for saying that. So we're going to carefully lift this up out of here. It's heavy. And go ahead and take our jars off. We have to pour the water off the lids here. And set this over here to cool. We're going to allow these jars 24 hours to seal. They usually do not require that long. They'll usually seal within the first hour. By sealing, you'll hear a pop, and then the little dimple that's on top of the lid will actually pull down and create an indentation. If for some reason your jar does not seal, sometimes that happens for whatever reason. Sometimes there's not enough head space, or there was something on your lid whenever you set it down. You'll just want to go ahead and put that in the refrigerator and go ahead and eat that, which is usually not a problem. The salsa is very good. So again, you want to go ahead and let those cool and try not to move them around while they're cooling. And again, you'll hear the pop. So just to go through the ingredients again, you'll need about 6 pounds of tomatoes. If you do not have a garden, you'll want to go ahead and visit a local farmer's market and go ahead and pick some of those up. And you'll need half a cup of cider vinegar or white vinegar and a package of Mrs. Wage's salsa mix. And you can get this at Kroger's or Walmart. Tractor Supply Co. even carries it. And go ahead and mix you up some salsa. I like to add other ingredients. You do not have to. In this recipe, I added banana peppers and cilantro, red onion, and lime juice. So you can add those things. You can even add garlic or jalapenos, parsley, and sweet onion, just about anything you want, or you can just go ahead and just do the tomatoes and the seasoning packet and the vinegar. For this particular recipe that we used today, I had 12 pounds of tomatoes. So I just want to make sure that everybody was aware that we doubled the recipe today. When you start this recipe, you're going to want to go ahead and wash and scald the skin of the tomatoes in boiling water and transfer those tomatoes over into the sink of ice water to stop that process. Again, that part of the process is not to cook the tomatoes, it's just to scald the skin so that you're able to peel the skin off easily. And go ahead and core those out and chop them up. Just a nice little medium dice is good, because you go from that process into the kettle where you cook it, and so you don't really want a small fine dice because it breaks the tomato down just a little bit too much and your salsa will be kind of runny. Once you have cooked the salsa on the pot, you want to go ahead and transfer it into your sterilized jars. If you used pints, you're going to process those for about 10 minutes, and quarts you want to do for 15. If you're actually reading the directions on the back of Mrs. Wage's salsa mix, it actually says that to process the jars for 40 minutes. I do not do that. Over the years, from watching my grandmother do this and my dad do this and comparing several different recipes, I actually only process mine for 15 minutes, again for quarts, and 10 minutes for pints. I feel that that's an adequate amount of time to kill all the pathogens and make sure that the food is safe inside the jars to eat and to preserve. So I just wanted to point that out. And this is a really, really great recipe. Again, I like the fact that you can, once you mix it up in the bowl, you can actually eat it right then. It's very, very good fresh like that. And then you can also freeze it in one of these containers right here and store it in the freezer, or you can go ahead and move on to the step of canning it and saving it for later. I also like to give this stuff away as Christmas gifts, so I'm sure my camera guys and my co-host will be getting some of that for Christmas. So this is a really great recipe. I hope you guys will possibly pick some of this up, and I had 2 pop right there, and do this at home. It is really, really tasty. So stay tuned for some other great recipes in the future, and I hope you join us. Thanks.